Thanks everyone for joining us today. I see that there are some people who've returned from our earlier workshop and some new faces as well. But yeah, my name is Nas. I'm the lead from the Singapore University of Biodiversity. I guess just as a quick introduction, we do biodiversity policy advocacy in Singapore. And our earlier workshop today was looking at, I guess, the role, or more accurately, the lack of a role biodiversity plays in our wider environmental policy in Singapore. And I guess this panel here is meant to serve as a follow-up to that, right? Given that biodiversity is not really a key feature in the environmental policies in Singapore, and that environmental policies in general are not exactly center stage in Singapore's wider policy strategy, what exactly can we do about it tangibly as youths or even as individuals? So yeah, I have here with me three very established youths in their respective fields. And so we get to hear from them about some of their work in their different groups, and how they themselves contribute to either biodiversity, climate, or environmental policy advocacy in Singapore. So maybe we can start with Natalie.
Thanks, Nath. I think that's a good introduction. Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm the program's co-lead at Singapore Youth for Climate Action. So we are a youth-led, volunteer-run environmental group in Singapore. And our goal is basically to empower youth in Singapore to advocate for equitable climate policies. What we do varies kind of year on year because, as a youth group, it's very flexible. We have a lot of different things that we want to do. The year before, we were doing a lot of educational workshops, a lot of kind of talking to experts, getting them to share about very complex facilitative topics. So things like carbon credits, carbon CCUS, ESG investing. And then this year, we're doing a lot more community work. We have one team that's looking at the Global Plastics Treaty. My team, the programs team, is looking at heat vulnerability in Singapore. So really understanding, environmental issues, how do they intersect with the experiences of people in the ground, and how do they intersect with other social or, economic issues in Singapore. So that's the lens that we bring to I think, advocacy in Singapore here.
I'm Jayden Kang. I manage all the outreach efforts of SYVB. Usually I'm behind the camera, but the reason is different. SYVB is an NGO, a group run fully by youth, and then we look at biodiversity policy specifically. So EIAs, environmental impact assessments, the management, and all the mitigation measures related to those. And then we also have guided walks and all this to raise awareness for all the biodiversity policy related issues like land use planning and
Right. Okay. So, hi guys. I'm Andreas. I lead the Inter-University Environmental Coalition. So it's a mouthful, right? But basically, in summary, we are a network that brings together the different university green groups that are on the scene. So groups from NUS, NTU, SUTD, SIM, SUSS, and one more. Wait, what is it? Okay, I forget. But we are the only sort of university that we haven't really touched to is SFU, but that's in the works. And basically what we do is my predecessors recognized that there's value in bringing some of these collective voices together to sort of touch on maybe what are some of the youth, what are some of their concerns, and then see how we as a coalition can better represent these voices and also find ways where we can synergize certain best practices. Very simple example, let's say two different groups are doing a workshop on maybe related to farming, right? Then how do we pair these groups together and find ways for them to collaborate? That's the short sort of genesis of what IUEC is. On top of that, we do things in a bit on the policy space also. So recently we have an engagement with Lepak where we look into the committee of supply engagement and then try to bring across the different youth leaders together in the same room to discuss maybe what are some of the recommendations and what are some of the areas of concerns. And one thing that we're also focusing right now on is also on green careers, considering the more practical side of sustainability perhaps. Maybe what are some of the areas that youths are interested to explore more? we try to create those platforms for them to interact with one another. Yeah.
So looks like we had the full range of expertise here, from international policy issues to more local policy and communication issues, and even like more capacity building oriented, like how can we prepare youth for more work in the future. So I think that's a very, very good start. But I also know from experience, I've been doing this for I think about 5 years now. And I know that a lot of this work can be very, very tiring and very, very exhausting. But all of you are still here, even in spite of like dealing with such complex issues. So I guess I'm a bit curious, like what got you all started in the first place and what keeps you going even in spite of like working with such complex issues? Yeah, anyone can start.
I think okay. So what got me started is Nasry. So yeah, we were bird watching and then looking for some migrant bird in botanic gardens, and then then he started
Yapping.
yapping, spilling about all the oh, have you heard about SME? Yeah. So yeah, I bought it clearly. So that's what got me started into this space specifically. So rather than just being like the normal hobbies, bird watcher or bird enthusiast, I got more into the policy space because of joining SYVB. And what keeps me going, I think, is really the fact that if you just stop, you might not have someone to do what you want for you, like be the change you want to see in the world, right? So if you feel like, oh, there's this problem here and then I need to do something about it, if you don't do anything about it, and you just give up, nobody might step up and actually do the work. Yeah.
Maybe I can go next. Yeah. So I think for me, anyone here watch Greta Thunberg? Yeah. So I think that was one of the main reason how I got started. Okay, so a bit cliche per se, but when I was in secondary school, I watched Greta Thunberg speak at the UN conference, and she can be a bit polarizing if you ask the sustainability scene, but there's no doubt in her sort of like efforts and movement in changing certain mindsets within youth. And I was one of them that got affected by it. And then I think I took a hiatus when I went JC and everything. It was only truly when I was after I finished NS, and then I was simply like I was doing like normal part-time jobs or waiting to go into uni, right? And then one day I thought to myself, oh, it would be quite interesting to continue this pursuit, to explore more about the sustainability scene. And that's when I tried finding an internship. Yeah, so I went to email a few non-profits here and there, and I ended up have an opportunity to work at Jayden Institute. Yeah, where I was more involved in like their community outreach programs, dealing with like human wildlife conflict. And I think it was from that experience, with a really very good mentor, when I really got to have a taste about what this space is all about. And to Nasry's question about what keeps me going now, definitely the community aspect is very important. I think us being here is really amazing thing. And the second thing is understanding kind of like this is a privilege after all, right? So me being in this environment, me being given certain resources is a privilege that I can have. So what should I do with that privilege? I think that's something that I try to figure out along the way. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like really good pointers and similarities with Jayden and Andres. I think similar to Andres, I actually stumbled into this space also. I was first year in university looking for an internship, and then at that time like I am socially kind of interested in different issues, but I hadn't found like a passion. And because of kind of the interest that I had, I landed an internship with the Singapore Green Building Council. And then I realized like, oh, there's so many things in sustainability in the environment that are very interesting and very complex. So I came from the lens of like a lot of curiosity, wanting to understand more about the space, knowing that there are a lot of issues and it's very complicated and we're all trying to work together to get like different solutions. And then after that, I thought to myself, like, what else can I do, right? So then I started to explore groups in my university. So, I did energy groups in NUS, and I did different things. And then after that, I thought about like, what about after university, right? Like when I am out there working, I also want to continue contributing. So I found SYCA and I was like, I really resonated with their mission. I really wanted to do like work with them. And then I joined SYCA 2 years ago. And yeah, here we are now. I think what continues to drive me is a lot of the same things, right? Like doing what you want. The work is very tiring, but it's also very meaningful and impactful to see yourself trying to make change and also the people around you trying to work together to make change. And yeah, just bringing that sense of curiosity and continuing to learn that keeps me going. Yeah.
Okay. I think thank you for your answers, by the way. Very well considered. I think from all three of your responses, you sort of highlight like some sort of common community, either as a reason for you, like the reason why you gravitated to a particular organization in the first place, or as a reason for you to keep going because you believe in the message and you believe that, you should step up to the role and to fulfill a more meaningful purpose. So let's take a look at the community on a deeper level, right? A lot of time we were already preaching to the converted within our own community, especially when you're talking about environmentalism, right? It's very easy for us to organize events and people who like environmental topics will just show up. But how do we reach beyond that echo chamber? How do we expand our community to include people who are not, I guess, pro-environmental or, may have views that are maybe not so supportive of the environment? How do we convince them that, hey, actually this affects you too, and that you have a voice or you have a role to play in this conversation as well?
Right. I think I can start off and then we can build out on that. Honestly, I have no solution. If anyone has a solution on how we can talk to the unconverted or talk to people who are on the fence or not very interested in environmentalism, please tell me because I also want to know. I think that's a problem that we've been facing at SYCA, honestly. We used to do a lot of workshops and events and we realized that we kept drawing the same crowds. People who were already interested and people who were already either one foot in the space or because they're already interested, they're already looking. So then you cannot draw the same crowds, right? And then I think we had a discussion on okay, so what do we do? And I think that's why we started on the community project. And that's why we started to take on the idea of heat as a topic to explore. Because I think in Singapore, everyone experiences heat, right? It's like a very everybody's like, oh, it's very hot. When people think of Singapore, it's like climate, we're tropical and everything. No, it's like very hot, right? And I think it's a common experience that bonds people, right? And I think it's something that everybody can understand and that we can communicate with people about. But it's also not just us coming to the community and saying, oh yeah, heat is because of climate change, you're gonna face increasing temperatures. I think it's also about understanding how they view heat and how do they view that as an issue. Because from talking to, so we've been talking to seniors in Tampines recently about heat. Actually, and we might think from the environmental space heat is a very big issue, right? Climate change. We know that warmer temperatures and warmer nights and everything. We might think it's a very big issue, but actually a lot of people that we talk to, they just say, oh, it's something that I experienced and I just have to live with it. And then I think it helps us to better understand the environment from a non-environmentalist perspective. And I think that's so important. And that's something that we really want to continue working on, which is engaging with the community that's not usually in the spaces that environmental people are already in. Yeah, and then trying to see from their point of view, how do they view certain environmental issues and how can we, work together with them to see is there anything that we need to address? Is there something that we need to highlight? So I guess that's the way that we're trying to answer the question.
That's very interesting. I think I'm interested to hear from Jayden actually, because you do outreach for SYVB. Fantastic team, by the way, SYVB. So yeah, since you do outreach and Natalie is talking about really reaching out to the community, talking to people about their narratives and what's important to them as a non-environmental person, as a lay person. So what are some things that you've sort of explored or are perhaps working on right now that maybe cover these sort of perspectives?
I think mainly from a wildlife matters perspective. If you speak to people that you bump into in the public, joggers in the nature reserves, or just random aunties going on hikes, or even just people that you bump into at the mall, you realize that everyone already has a say in something wildlife related. If they live in Choa Chu Kang, it's the parakeets, right? if they live in Tampines, it's the cicadas that are invading their houses. And I think one thing to understand is after like meeting all these people, you realize that everyone's already, that's not really converted or uninitiated. Everyone already has a say. They just don't know where to direct those efforts. Yeah. So, you tell someone, hey, I know you don't have any prior experience in biodiversity, or, you don't go to intertidal, but they're going to reclaim 108 something hectares. 93? Oh, yeah, it's 100.
Sorry, I read the EIA yesterday, so it's very fresh memory.
Yeah, 93 hectares of seagrass meadow. And then you tell them what a seagrass meadow is, and they're like, wow, protest, right? Like, so everyone is very, already willing to do conservation, but they just don't have the time or didn't have the reason to, right? And it's quite easy to actually reach out to people regarding these kind of issues. Yeah. Our guided walks, you usually have some uninitiated participants that are actually just like family members of the person who says, hey, I want to go for this guided walk, Then they bring their parents along, and then we bring them around, and then the parents end up saying, hey, you all doing good work. Yeah, I will actually like, look into this, or here's some words I have to say, all that kind of things. So I think, yeah, my point is really, everyone is already like initiated in the wildlife scene, but then, they really just don't have a direction yet. And so if you just hand them a direction, give them something to fight for, right? And then they will just go and do it lah.
Okay. So speaking of directing people to things, I'll direct the question now to you.
Okay.
Andres.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I think as what Natalie mentioned, it's a very complicated issue, right? Two things that come to mind. First thing is the target audience is very important. So, when you talk about outreach, different target audience, there's different ways of outreaching to them, right? If you talk to small kids, right, storytelling or, different aspects. If you talk to people that are a bit older, what are some of the tools that you can use? And then the second thing I wanted to say is, after knowing your target audience, then what is their needs, right? So knowing their needs, and then how can you meet their needs, right? So I share this because two examples that came to mind also. The first one is I met some youths from Portugal at some event, and then they were sharing how they tried to push for more public transport in their home country. But then when they were packaging the issue, it was more a matter of telling the layperson that this will help to cut costs for them. So cutting costs for them more so than driving like the narrative that, this will help to reduce carbon emissions per se. So that is one example of meeting needs. I think even in Singapore, one quick example I can think of is, the work that EcoWorks does, where they have detergent refill station, right? And then they try to make it a bit more accessible by putting it at the void decks, try to make it cheaper than the household detergent brands. And I think that's where that cost saving element comes in, and it's something that people can easily adopt, right? So kind of like packaging in that way, I think that's one way we can try to reach out to, or enact certain actions between people that are maybe not so converted yet, and then from there on see how we can carry on the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think both Natalie and Jayden have elaborated on like how their work sort of ties into policy elements. And I think it's pretty clear because both organizations, SYVB and SYCA, are quite focused on policy. In your case, talking about heat and plastics, and in Jayden's case, his work concerning communicating land use policy to people. So I'm curious about what sort of involvement IUEC actually has with regards to policy.
Policy, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So how does like IUEC either like work directly with policymakers or like supports youths in like engaging with policymakers?
Yeah, good question. Policy-wise, so with any youth groups, I think it's also quite fluid, right? It depends on the current team that's in place and what their interest lies. So really someone might be interested in nuclear, and then that's where you want to do maybe like a nuclear engagement. Currently for us, I think our policy-wise, I think just now one example that I shared is sort of like hearing more of what the university students have in mind. And these uni students are, of course, the member groups that work with us. So maybe some of their university leaders. And then kind of like seeing how we can maybe represent our voice. So we do things like also maybe engagement with people from the ministry, certain public office holders. That's a start. In terms of how effective this engagement are, in terms of like the transparency and everything, that's a conversation for another day, right? But I think it's a good first step. And it's quite important to have groups in this space, I feel, because I learned this saying also, like once you're if you're on the table, they are not on the menu, right? So if you're on the table and you have that avenue to talk to certain policymakers, I think that's a good start also. A second thing I wanted to raise very quickly is we try to also move this approach a bit through engagement. So a very quick plug, next Friday we are organizing this festival. It's called the Sustainability Youth Festival, and it's actually tapping on the SG Eco Fund. So the SG Eco Fund is this fund by the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment, right? And then that's where we really try to showcase what exactly are the youths doing on the ground. Also, in a sense, like driving a certain message to them. Like you see, when the guest of honor comes and everything, you see, there's these groups doing all these things, right? From there on, we hope that then we can maybe gain a bit more support, from maybe even the government and certain stakeholders. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. So I guess for all three of you, your work involves like engaging with very diverse groups of stakeholders, right? And I can speak from my own personal experience, having done both outreach to the layperson and outreach to the government, that these require very different strategies, right? With the government, they tend to like very technical, very nuanced. The more technical you are, the more like, actually got this consideration, the more they like it, because then it shows like, oh, you're considering multiple perspectives. But when you're talking to members of the public, they like simpler messages, right? Like, give me, like, if you want me to focus on one thing, just focus on the one thing. Don't complicate things so much, right? So I suppose you've probably encountered a lot of like these sort of like patterns in your work. And I was just wondering if through engaging these very different groups of stakeholders, what sort of like lessons have you personally gained in terms of not just what works in engaging both of them, but perhaps what are some of your personal struggles in engaging them? What have you learned helps in helping these audiences listen to you, and also helps in keeping your sanity when talking to some of these people? Because I can also say that listening to both government and public, you will lose your sanity to some degree. So yeah, if you guys have any advice to share with me, I would appreciate it.
I think I can start, and I'm kind of building off Andrew's point of how they are like IUEC, right, other groups, they work with the government on like consultations or engagements, things like that. I think in the Singapore environmental scene, there's like a spectrum of groups, right? You have groups that work more closely with government. They are more closer, networks and relationships with policymakers. And then they also then sit in on more consultations and closed-door engagements. And there's a benefit with that, right? Because the closer you are to government, the more you are able to share your opinions and your voices, and potentially also get information and knowledge that is not privy to the general public, right? And then there are also groups on the extreme where they're very local. They call attention to a lot of controversial or sensitive issues, and they're not afraid to kind of share their opinions and voices publicly. And then in return, they also then often don't get access to the kind of networks and opportunities that being closer to the government would have, because they are often sharing opposite kind of opinions from what the policymakers might be more interested in. I think kind of where SYCA sits, maybe just a general observation, right? Again, my personal opinion, it could be different. I think we kind of sit in the middle, where we are kind of established enough that we have some credibility or some potential audience when we share about certain things. And also, I think you mentioned us with engaging the government, right? You need to bring your A game. You need to make sure you've done the research. You need to make sure you've done your homework. Make sure that you know what you're saying, you know what the policies are, and then you know kind of what your messaging is. Because if not, you're not going to get heard at all, right? And I think that's what we have done in some closed-door engagements that we have gone for. Some of the things that we've done with exploring policies and ideating recommendations. That's what we do also on the side. But I think we are also at the same time not afraid to share our opinions. We think that there's an issue that, we think the public should, pay attention to. We would like the government to, maybe take notice. We are also definitely not afraid to share. And I think that's what we do, trying to communicate with the public, right? We want to highlight issues that maybe not at the forefront. So for example, with the Plastics Treaty, I think no other group in Singapore, or like not a lot of groups in Singapore are covering that, right? I think that's something that we definitely have been exploring quite a lot in the last few months. And I think also with heat, right? Another thing also that we're trying to explore further. So I think with that, we are not afraid to say what we feel and call attention to that. And I think this is both in terms of engaging the public and also policymakers who might take notice if this issue gets enough traction. So I think, but there's some challenges. If you're not on the government's good side, it might be harder. Yes.
You want to share a bit more about those challenges? If you face them personally or if you've observed other groups struggling with them.
I mean, the groups that are more on the, the extreme end of the spectrum, they definitely get sometimes, they don't get the same kind of opportunities than other groups. And sometimes it might seem very unfair, right, But I think it's all of understanding where we are, where we lie on the spectrum, and what can we do, even if we are not given the same opportunities. We still have a position to play. We still have a space where we can raise our opinions and highlight certain issues, right? And then these kinds of also draw a different audience into our work. So I think it's a matter of understanding where we are. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, maybe I can share a bit about IUEC. Before that, I just wanted to say, compared to groups like SYCA, SYVB, I think they have been around for quite some time and also are doing really great work, in the policy scene and everything. I'm quite new to the space, maybe 2 years, and IUEC in itself, we do some policy work, but I think in general, how I envision IUEC is also more serving as sort of like a bridge role, serving more as a network role. So maybe not so much strongly into the policy space, maybe engaging directly in terms of like being very focused on researching and on a certain topic, right? I think other groups are doing a very great part of it. In fact, I think after this we should have a conversation between the groups also about maybe our strategy moving forward in terms of engagement. But IUC kind of hopes to come in to see how we can then maybe connect certain groups with the correct stakeholders. And also, I think also on that side, maybe I can share a bit about how my experience of like working with the government and understanding a bit of the challenges behind the scenes. So I was part of the youth delegation last year that went to COP29. And then part of the COP29 sort of deliverable was actually we had to do a youth delegation report. So long story short, we had to offer policy recommendations based off what each groups are interested to do and propose that, right? So as you all know, when we propose about policies, a lot of things are already set in stones. And the greatest sort of like thing that I realized is, okay, the government, after all, many of them are just 9 to 5 workers, they're 96 workers, right? And they all have their own portfolio in place. Right? So things that are identified is things like there's many agencies that don't have a dedicated team that is sort of like working directly with youths. Yeah, so that's one point I want to say. And then that extra portfolio, the extra manpower that needs to put into consultation and everything ends up being dumped onto someone's plate. So that itself adds to the problem, right? So it's a matter of capacity on the government front also. And I think that kind of like complicates the issue a bit. That's probably like my greatest sort of like takeaway from that. Yeah, but when I think, when you mention about talking to the government and talking about to the public, definitely different approach and also definitely a lot of nuances and trade-offs behind the scene. But what will be of course great and really very important are still putting people together in the same room and then having different stakeholders sort of seeing the different part of the picture. And this is, I feel, regardless of where each group lies on the spectrum, because that's when things can sort of like move in a direction where it can be a bit more inclusive and the needs of the different groups are being met. Yeah.
I think my biggest struggle is when you try to talk to someone and then they're like, hey, you're young you only been around for 20 years, I working for 20 years and what do you know, right? So I think we have to be prepared for these kind of situations as well. You have to be like really as much of an expert as you can be on that topic, because we hold a booth in the festival of biodiversity, and so this is usually held in a mall where like Bedok Mall, where people are walking around, and so some people will look at you, when you're talking and give you that side eye, right? And then they say, sure go, legit or not. So when they start to give those kind of looks or ask you, are you sure? I think you have to really be very confident and have the science ready to hand it at them, right? Like slap them with all the facts so that they cannot doubt you. Yeah, I think that's the biggest struggle so far for the comms side. It's really just oh, you're a youth, you don't really know much. Yeah, so
Good. Thanks for your insight. I think there's a lot of material for me to ask personalized questions now. So going off of Andrew's focus on collaboration and cooperation, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned, but it's a question for you. So I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that you're probably one of the few groups in Singapore that's really working on heat and on the Global Plastics Treaty. So how did that sort of come about? Like, were you working with any other groups, or did you liaise with any other stakeholders, or when you were preparing your responses to the Global Plastics Treaty and to the heat issue as well, I guess? Or was it difficult finding collaborators, and why was that the case?
Okay, I cannot comment much on the Global Plastics Treaty because that's being done by Teres, which is our president. But I think what has been really good with the Plastics Treaty is that kind of the SYCA team does a lot of like the research and understanding of the topic and coming up with recommendations, speaking to experts. But then we also then diffuse that knowledge to the other environmental groups, such that we also can then leverage on their networks and their kind of established reputation or the fact that they have a say in certain things, to also help to push our recommendations, especially when, for example, sometimes we might not exactly be included in some of the conversations that are centered on the plastic treaty, even though we have done work on it. So then what then happens in that case is that it's really good to have this kinds of collaborative networks, right? Because you can then work with other youth groups who have similar kind of understandings, but they have their own sets of networks and connections with their audiences, the public, with students, with youth, and even with the government, right? And I think that is kind of the way that I hope the environmental space goes forward. That different groups, even though they may have different focuses, even though they maybe have different kind of strategies and objectives, we still work together to support each other in this like greater fight, because that's how we can build like an impact. Because it's very hard to be one group or one person trying to struggle on your own. With the heat group, we've taken a slightly different approach. So we work with community partners, so your family service centers, those that are working with more vulnerable communities on the ground, and we work with their networks to basically engage their communities in trying to understand their experiences with heat. So I think you can see two different sets of collaboration, right? One that is with the kind of like-minded environmental youth groups, not just youth, right? Environmental groups in general, but also then working with other community partners in the space. Maybe they are focused on things like mental health, they are focused on social issues, but they know that there's like a connection and an intersection with the environment. And then that's where we come and step in and say, can we work together on a certain topic that is important to both of us? So yeah, I think that's in general what we've been doing.
Okay. Happy that you brought up the whole idea of intersectionality and how environmental issues are hardly ever just environmental. So if you attended the workshop that was held just now, you would have known that in Singapore's environmental policy and strategy, Singapore rarely does anything for the good of the planet. A lot of our environmental policies, I'm just speaking very frankly here, from my personal observation, have some sort of underlying economic pressure that they are trying to address, either a risk to our national security or our long-term sort of prosperity as a nation, or as an opportunity for us to capitalize in terms of growth, in terms of development or reputation. So the whole idea of intersectionality, I guess, it taps a little bit into that. There's an intersection between an environmental policy and the good that it does to the environment, and also some sort of economic benefit. But going back to the whole idea of environmental policies that are championed by youths and intersectionality, I'd like to ask this to, I guess mainly to Andres.
Okay.
But I guess anyone here can comment on it as well, because I would guess that through working with different university groups, you would encounter all sorts of different personalities. I would imagine that, you know, the NTU group and the NUS group, which are the groups I'm familiar with, I'm not sure about the others, would have different sort of structures and different sort of like dynamics within the group, different sort of culture. So how do you like manage those different cultures and different perspectives when you're not forcing, but you know, you're encouraging collaboration?
Right.
And like, if possible, do you sort of like play out these differences and how these differences can contribute to people's understanding of environmental policies and how they affect people? Sorry, I know there's a lot of different questions.
So it's a matter of maybe what are some of the challenges we face of getting people together, right?
Yeah, I suppose that's the case, yeah. Because I mean, if they have very different perspectives, yes, it contributes something positive, but I imagine there's also like conflicts at play. So if you're trying to encourage people from diverse backgrounds, and I understand that in university class, not a lot of people are actually environmental people. Some of them are from very different backgrounds, engineering, business. So when they come into the environmental scene with their own field of study, like sort of like culture, right? That can be a culture shock for them. So how do you like manage those expectations on intersectionality, but also like drive forward like a unified message for environmentalism?
Yeah, I think that's a great question that, you know, I'm also trying to sort of like figure out along the way. But I can share with you guys some of my thoughts on this. Definitely when you talk about, you know, how each group have their own maybe niche or area of focus, right? That's very true, right? You know, you have a group that maybe are doing things related to environmental law, right? And then you have a group that's doing more things related to biodiversity, and maybe a group more on like sustainable living. So how then do we sort of like connect everyone together? So something that I'm also trying to figure out and learn along the way is, someone told me this, like, you know, a coalition itself is very hard, right? The coalition that usually works are those that are driven by profit, so business related coalitions, right? But you know, sometimes you need to recognize that, you know, a coalition doesn't need to be strong, but it can be useful in certain sense. So how can it be useful? That's where, you know, we try to explore different ways. The festival next Friday is one example where, you know, I think our team was very intentional in bringing out how things connect, right? So the interconnectedness of each group's niche, right? And then trying to piece everything together, right? So this sort of ability to, you know, maybe tap on what each group is good at doing and then putting them all together in the same area, we try to sort of then be able to drive that message to people that are coming, right? What can they experience? They can experience something from each group, and then we hope that through that, you know, maybe something on greenwashing, right? Something on biodiversity related thing, maybe something a bit on, you know, energy, right? We hope that, you know, through that they can start to really experience how things connect lah. And I think that is really one way that we are trying to do. Of course, if you talk about challenge per se, for this kind of coalition to work, right, one very, very major challenge that we face is how, you know, university groups always change their leadership every year. Yeah, so that means that we need to re-engage everyone every year. And then the president or the people leading the group will have different things that they want to do lah. Yeah, so that's where the challenge comes from. But it's something that I'm also figuring out along the way. Planning to talk to all the different stakeholders, and then you need, you know, see how to move forward with this lah.
Okay. So that's very interesting with this here, because we keep circling back to the idea of like collaboration and cooperation as a way to address our struggles. I think that's a very youth focused way, because we don't have our own domain expertise. A lot of us don't really know much, so our immediate inclination is to sort of like seek help from others and seek input from others. And I think that ties in very well with one of the sentiments that Jayden raised actually, which is, you know, you have people come up to your face like, are you sure? Do you really know what you're talking about? Which is a question that I've gotten like a couple times as well myself. And so it's a very relatable struggle for I think a lot of us. So I'm just wondering, like when you mentioned that, you know, the best way to address this is to really like be prepared with the facts. So how would you say you personally like go out and do your research, collect the facts, and maybe collect different perspectives? Who do you normally like tap on in your personal network? And you know, how do you find these people in the first place if you are someone who doesn't have a network?
I think one advantage that we have as a youth that others don't is that we have a lot of free time. Yeah. So, yeah, you know, if you have questions, you go and find the answer. You really just, you know, just go out and keep bird watching until you gather the facts yourself right firsthand. And then you have some observations, then you can ask some bird experts that, you know, you just email them or message them on Facebook, because most experts are actually reachable via Facebook. They're older, so they use Facebook. Maybe the younger experts would be on Instagram lah, but yeah, all these people are actually just like a social media message away. You know, these people crave all these discussions. So if you tell them, hey, I observed this weird shift in the population dynamics of this bird in the nature reserve, or oh, I saw them nesting. You can just shoot them a message, and then they'll gladly just have a discussion with you that, oh, this is because of that. Maybe here's other things you can look out for, and then you can really gain a direction of where to hit next. Yeah, really, because as a youth, it's very easy to put a few thousand hours into one place, right? I mean, if people can gather like thousands of hours in a video game, you just take that commitment, you put it into nature, or something related, spend it at the computer doing research also can, like. So really you can just ask all those domain experts that are well established as well. Yeah, I think a lot of people, as youth, we are very scared of reaching out, asking questions. So like, oh, I want to ask a question to this person behind Lord Singapore, but then I'm very scared, like, do I like email the person, or I'm not gonna email the person because shy ma. Yeah. Then you just wasted yourself an opportunity, because you can email the real time, right? Or you can message someone like Francis Yap, who is a bird watcher, and you can message all these people and or email them. They're always very happy to help out. Yeah. In fact, I think they would enjoy receiving some information that you can provide. If you just day one of bird watching, then you go and ask him some questions, I think he will be a bit annoyed, right? Because like go and do something first, then you come to me, that kind of thing. So yeah, but
Yeah, I think building on Jayden's point, right? It's like two-folds, right? Like immersing yourself in the space. There's so many things online. You can spend hours reading like our declaration of like what's our target for the Paris Agreement, right? What's our 2035 target? What do we what's our emissions inventory? Even like all the nature stuff you can read online. You can do it, you can read. But I think another thing that is very good for youth as well is that because of our positive nature as youths, we get a lot of opportunities to, number one, sit in on a lot of like discussions, dialogues, webinars. There's so many things out there. Experts are constantly talking about different parts of sustainability, and as youth, you not only have the time, but you also have the opportunity to be in those places, and that is itself amazing way to learn. And I think also second thing is like when we talk to experts, I realize that experts really, really like talking, and especially like talking to youth, because they have a lot of things that they know and they want to share, and they want to really share it with an audience that wants to continue learning as well. And that's like the beauty of youth, right? Because you are new, you are curious, you want to ask questions. And I think also the third thing is like we don't want to stray away from just listening. We want to engage the experts critically, and that involves doing our own research and then coming with critical questions to think to ask the experts, like, do you really think this is the best way? Do you really think this is going to work? What is your opinion? And this is my opinion. Can we talk about it? And I think don't be afraid to share your opinions as youth, but also at the same time be open to sharing from others. I think that's a common sentiment that we probably have with the experts. Yeah, sorry to jump on your point.
So I think it was a very good insight to add on. Before I comment on that, Andres, you want to add anything? Or
when they reset everything, really good. So I do agree. It's like kind of like putting yourself out there, and I think sometimes it's really a matter of you never know where that will end up lah. Like who you talk to, or what kind of questions you ask. What kind of new people you meet. You never know how that will be helpful lah. Yeah, something that I learned along the way, and something that I think really greatly benefit me a lot also. Yeah.
Yeah, so jumping on what you mentioned about how experts really like to talk to youth. Personally, I have seen that a lot. I do feel like it's a little bit tokenistic sometimes. A lot of times it's kind of like a photo op, especially if the experts are someone who's very, very established, either in the private sector or even in the government side. Ministers love to be photographed with youths. And I do know that youths take full advantage of this because like, why would I raise it the government way through the bureaucracy when I go straight to the minister and just complain, right? So I know that that's a strategy that has worked out relatively well for me personally. But yeah, I'm just wondering if you guys have had any personal experiences with tokenism, either for a good way or in a bad way, because youths like us, we do have to face a lot of these issues. So I guess transitioning more from a policy perspective to more of our own struggles as youths. Yeah, so how do you navigate that? Either like, people like looking down on you and thinking that, you don't really know what you're talking about, or people who see you as a tool to be used to as a means to an end. So like have you had any experiences dealing with this, and like if you did, how do you sort of work your way through it?
Lupa kau tu? I think I'll be first.
Hopefully the thinking is because you haven't had too many experiences.
Okay, right. Okay, I answer. Not really, I would say. Not really.
Or do you feel that your engagements with a lot of these people have been more genuine and not tokenistic?
Yeah. So mainly genuine, but also at the same time maybe because there's some maybe factors behind the play that I don't know of. Maybe. Yeah, but I think to build on your point, generally has been quite genuine, and I think a lot of that comes also from the fact being very intentional and careful about kind of like the mentors or kind of like the people you talk to. I think it's very easy to sort of like figure out like what are some of the intentions that someone have, or maybe okay, now that you say it, maybe I have a couple of experiences where they are maybe sort of like engaging you, but then sometimes after you want to ask something else, then they suddenly walk away or something, right? It's like kind of like, oh, it feels very like not genuine. Yeah, I think it does happen sometimes, but I think building on what Natalie and Jayden have shared, sort of going in being prepared also will be quite helpful lah. Going in being prepared, being curious, and there's so many people that you can tap on. At least that's what I feel. So if there's this kind of people, just veil off them lor. Yeah. And I think that's what I have to share. Yeah. Anyone else want to go? Yeah.
Boat ride to offshore intertidal reefs are very expensive. But then there has been, I think there has been this expert of the coastal space that has been quite genuine lah. She will just bring youths on board if there's spare space on the boat. Because if the capacity is 15, you can bring 15. Even if only 12 people of a team show up, there's still 3 slots left, right? So she just let the young people take on those slots, and so to her is more bang for a buck, and then for us is, wow, it's a free boat, right? Yeah, and through that we get to actually see all these reefs that are not necessarily in danger directly, but might be impacted by reclamation projects or oil spills and all that that might happen, right? So the fact that we get to go and see all these places firsthand rather than just being brought behind this massive paywall that we can never afford, right? And then just being able to only read up about it through books, online resources. Yeah. So imagine you go for an engagement, and then the government suddenly talking about land reclamation of Long Island, and then you know, all the experts are like saying, oh, but then there's this reef and that reef, and you know, or like fish farm projects, and then all the experts are also talking about other reefs that you have never heard of before. You know, when will you ever get to see that personally, right? So, you know, the fact that some, I think even Marcus Ng is also bringing some youngsters out on boat trips. You know, all these experts are really trying to get all this use out so that they can really go and see all these reefs firsthand, because they're not very accessible at all. In fact, I think they're the most inaccessible part of wildlife in general in Singapore, in all the offshore reefs. So the fact that all these experts are really funneling use out, I think, yeah, I think I've had more examples of genuine, you know, interactions than it's good to hear exploitation.
Maybe the times have changed since my generation. There's
Just one thing that I want to quickly add on is I think sort of like doing your homework is very important. Something I realized because we did have encounters where a lot of people want to partner with us, right? Then it comes to a point where, you know, what is their anger in this, right? What they hope to get out of it. And then second thing that as you is bandwidth, like we have bandwidth for certain amount of things only, but you know, if you go into a partnership and they want you to do this and do that, right? Then I think that's where you really have to reconsider whether it's probably. I just want to put that in.
A lot of thoughts. I think I'll probably summarize on some of the points that Jayden and Andres raised. I think Andres mentioned, you know, how when engaging with policymakers, I think there's a lot of chances for us to engage with policymakers, and I think, like, you know, Jayden mentioned, these kinds of things could cost money or even cost time, you know, on the experts fund to organize these things for youth, right? And I think as youth, that is a huge privilege, right? I think we have been very thankful to have been blessed with all these opportunities. And I think once we've acknowledged that, I think also it's also very fair for us to see that sometimes these opportunities can be tokenistic, right? In that when people put in resources and time and money, they want something out of it, and sometimes it's not youth engagement that they want, right? Sometimes it's the opportunity to see that they are engaging youths without having, you know, without giving youth the space. I think Andres, you made the point earlier of, like, you know, having the seat at the table. But I think I want to caveat that by saying, like, sometimes you have a seat at the table, but that doesn't mean you have a mic. Even if you have a mic, even you share your opinions, things might not change. So understanding that, you know, there are different levels of youth engagement, and you might not have the opportunities all the way. You know, sometimes, you know, the climate and the context that we're in Singapore might not afford the opportunity for youth to go very, very far compared to other countries that we see, you know, in terms of, like, you know, youth being in government or you know, advocating on a, you know, activism and protesting kind of level. But there are some things that we can still try to do here in Singapore. And being aware of, you know, what are some opportunities that are tokenistic, and understanding how can you still try to make small changes or you know, get your voice heard in some of these tokenistic spaces. I think that's very important to understand as youth. Yeah, I think it's both a blessing and at the same time also potentially a risk and a trap that we might have to face as youth when we, you know, you capitalize on some of the opportunities that are given to us. But I think also the second point is that sometimes it's not like just someone else engaging us as youth, you know, and then I think it's very important for youth to also actively go out there and try to find spaces where they can work in. So I think just sharing an example, right? Like Therese, who's our president working on the Global Plastics Treaty, I think that's an upcoming, you know, international discussion on the treaty that is in Switzerland. And actually she hustled her way there to get a spot at the convention and to get funding. And these are not opportunities that were just given to her on a silver platter. It was something that she had to go out there and fight and get the opportunities from the networks. And I think it's something that youth might overlook, in that in looking at all the opportunities that are out there, maybe there are some opportunities that we have to find on our own so that we make our own impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's good. Very good. So thank you all so much for all your insight. I think we have some time to gather questions from the floor if anyone wants to ask our very distinguished panel here. If you guys are wondering anything or any questions came up.
So you guys mentioned something about regards of policy making and whatnot, and that I just want to ask, you guys have some, like for example, one of you mentioned that you have less resources to work with and whatnot, and you guys have to, and yet you guys have expected to bring your A game to set policies to the government, and even then you guys may not be heard by them or whatnot. I just want to ask, my question is that has the government given you guys help in that regard in terms of resources to ensure that you guys get heard and to better your policies that you guys can pose?
It's a very good question. Any more comment?
I think MParks has so SYVB, looks at the Booming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and all member parties, which Singapore is one of them, has to submit an action plan on how they're gonna fulfill those targets. So 23 targets, and then Singapore has to fulfill 23. So in charge of this is National Parks Board, IBC, the International Biodiversity Conservation Division, and so far they have given us a very big ear, and they listen, and so far there's change lah. It's not like they, oh yeah, I want to hear your thoughts, and then just ignore you completely. Yeah, you'll never hear them back from an email, right? But no, they really, in fact, they are even willing to meet in person. Usually it's just emails flying back and forth, but IBC specifically is like, okay, if you want, you can meet, and then we can elaborate more what we mean when we give our policy recommendations, stuff like that. Yeah, but usually it's formal documents, flying back and forth through emails.
What about you, Natalie?
I think I'm gonna share a more limited view, and then I think maybe Andres, you can drain a point on like CYUP and everything.
Sure.
I think okay, how do I put it? As I mentioned, I think some groups get more resources than others, right? And I think it's it's just a matter of what has happened and everything. Won't delve into more, but we have had some opportunities as SYCA. We have had some opportunities and some resources from like the government and everything. But I think a lot of what we do is really kind of gone up. So we're very thankful to our volunteers and our core team, who are all volunteers, by the way. They have full-time jobs as like working adults, students, but they put in the hours and the time to do the research, to do the coordinating, to put together events. And I think that itself is kind of the greatest resource we have, right? We don't need to wait for, external funding or external opportunities. We can go out there and try to do something on our own, and then work with kind of the networks that we have to kind of bring change. Of course, we would love if the government can give us more resources, but I mean, in all industries, right? Not just in the environment. More resources sometimes come with more guidelines, more terms and conditions, right? And do you want to operate in that space where you have to kind of adhere to certain, norms and like guidelines in terms of the work that you can do? I think that's a conversation that each group has in terms of whether they want to tap on more resources. Resources are available, it's just, whether or not you want to pursue them and whether or not you are given the opportunity to do so. Yeah.
To build on that, maybe a view on IUEC. So context, IUEC tried to institutionalize at one point of time to become a society. Why we wanted to become a society is because then you can receive some form of formal grants. Why that didn't happen, various reasons. But one of it, of course, I think as what Natalie pointed out, there'll be a lot more guidelines in place. There's a lot more, not only guidelines, but also administrative work that the youths themselves must do. And sometimes these are things that are very hard to navigate, consider our limited bandwidth, right? So it's putting extra resources to there. So, I think with that said, to answer your question, it's really a matter of also how much resources do you want to get, and in return, what are some of the trade-offs that are in place lah. I think I just wanted to also point out, I think previously I was sharing about how on the government front, maybe it's a matter of capacity, right? In terms of like, their civil servants have limited capacity and everything. And then how that may affect how they interact with certain, groups like us and everything. What I wanted to point out is, then it's a matter of the culture, right? The culture of how the government works in Singapore. Why I point it out is so because when I was at COP, I had the opportunity to find out more about how other countries, interact with youths. Countries in EU, countries in Spain, right? They have things like a Spanish Youth Council. So it's a legally binding separate council that has a funding of 1 million every year. And then that's where the government must formally sort of like consult them on certain youth issues. And then they have the funding to do things like a youth report every year where they collect what are some of the youth concerns and everything, and then voice it out in parliament. So that's called like the formal approach. But in Singapore, that is very different, right? A lot of things come through places like National Youth Council, for example. They are the ones sort of maybe driving some of the youth consensus. And then that also evolves the approaches and the place that I would say civil societies play lah. But I speak this maybe more on my personal note and also maybe from what I observe, also as an intern in the government now, because for context, I'm interning at the MSc lah. Yeah, so I get to see a bit of the back end things. Things are trying to change, but even when things change, it's a lot depending on who are driving the change. So within the ministry itself, there may be certain younger staff that are more interested to have stronger engagement, for more agencies to do more, right? And I think things are moving in a certain direction. I think even with the National Youth Council, their attempt with the SG Youth Plan, that's one example, right? Of course, there's often limitations and often certain things that can't be addressed fully. But I do believe that, given how the culture and the context of, how Singapore has historically consulted youths, I'm seeing things slowly moving in a certain direction. So I think that's where we are also trying to work on our front. Sorry, that's quite long.
I think that's very insightful. Yeah. Do you have any other questions from the floor?
Okay, I got 2 questions. Maybe the first one is supposed to become the sharing. Probably adding on to what you guys have done. Maybe not sure. I think you should in the sort of seeing for about 5 years past, and considering like the next few years we are looking at civic in nature. How you guys feel like the policies or the changes that you have seen in the last few years, and how do you feel about it? Us moving there, are we ready?
Specifically for city in nature.
Like, and I guess just in general about like the efforts that y'all have done for the last few years, have not seen any changes that is actually, is actually done already. Like, if not like y'all spend like, so I know it's gonna take a lot of baby steps and all, but like the effort that y'all put in, do y'all feel like is coming back in terms of the policies?
I think I've been around the longest, so I shall answer later. Hear from the newer ones first if there's any progress in the 2 years that you guys have been active.
Big steps are supposed to be taken. We're still in the boom. I feel like we're not ready at all yet, so far for the biodiversity side. Oh, anything wildlife related. Human-wildlife conflict hasn't been budging, even though all the nature groups have been trying to pull together resources since like 6 years ago, pre-COVID, right? Everyone's like, oh, we will raise awareness through this means, that means, give talks, go to void that whole all those sharing session, or like all these kind of things, right? And still, Boon Lay Market, you see one turn and then you hack it to death. So I feel like public perception needs to shift, and to do that, I don't think the nature group is powerful enough to, really have a say. We can give 200, 400% of effort, but you still cannot change not even 2 million, people's perception of what wildlife is, right? To them, they see it as this thing's encroaching on my space. This is the urban area. You should stay on that side. Yeah, even though we are very much encroaching on theirs, right? So I think that's the biggest issue, and we need those big shot government agencies to really do something so that something can change. An example is education syllabus. So I think all nature groups have been pushing for this for too long now. But yeah, we would say, have more local wildlife, examples to be put in the education syllabus, so that all those biology students, all those, like all those geography students, just bio and geography students, it will cover such a substantial amount of population of the future population once they go through school, that you would have changed enough of the public perception, right? But nothing has really changed. Nothing has happened yet. So yeah, I think that's the baby steps that will be taken, lah, right? But so far nothing has started on that end. Because yeah, the nature groups can preach, but so far if you're not the authority, I will not listen to you. Like as a member of public, you look at a person like Acres, who are you? Oh, you must be one of those like wildlife lover, But if you hear it from the MOE as a student, I think you would, like all this exposure, learning journeys and all that. I think that is really a baby step, lah. Some teachers are really trying to push for a change. Like they see that the government won't do it, so they'll do it themselves. Like literature teachers, forcing, making a class assignment to write a poem about, because it's literature class, write a poem about something nature related. So to do that, they bring them to, on a learning journey to, a nature park, give them one round, and then gather everything, the sights and sounds, and then the next day they'll do a poem about it. Yeah, sounds like that, But then again, how big is a teacher's class, right? He gives a teacher 5 years, how many people can she or he convert? Stuff like that. Really, I feel like all these baby steps are, still maybe five years away, or I hope another GE away, right? Yeah. So, yeah, whether we'll get there, don't know. Yeah.
I think just add on very quickly about the education front, because I used to be at Jayden Gula, so I had a bit of taste, like how teachers and the biodiversity education and everything comes about. Very true. It's really depending on the teacher, how much effort and resources they want to put into it on top of what they already have on their plate. And then taking a step back, it also really depends on the school. Something I realized is the level of access to this kind of education, in sustainability and everything, is also at this point of time still very disproportionate. So certain schools, maybe with more resources and more emphasis on sustainability, maybe from the top leadership and everything, that's where they do have more programs and everything that's related to that. Then that also affect how disproportionate it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think agree on a lot of pointers. I think we'll go in order of years of experience in this field. But I think, to be honest, I think it's a very long drawn process, and I'm not sure if Nas will feel that way. But I think the work that we do today, you probably won't see the result instantly. Actually, I don't think you will ever see the result instantly unless you are issuing a statement against the government, and then the government is not happy, and then issue another statement back. Maybe that's some kind of impact that you will see directly. In terms of clarifying some policies that they might have. But I think other than that, right, the journey is very, very long term. And also the journey is not very transparent, right? As youth groups, maybe we bring our opinion to the table, to a dialogue, and then we say, we hope the government can take note of XYZ. Right? Or we do a communication, campaign, and then we say, we hope the public can take note of ABC, of a certain, policy or issue. Right? But you don't really see the impact directly. Because maybe, things like changing mindsets take a long time. Making change in policy, you have to go through the government bureaucracy, you have to, reach out to the right policymakers, and the person in charge ultimately have to have the kind of courage and mindset of wanting to make a change, and then policies then change in that way, right? So it's not a linear pathway in terms of what we do equals to a certain outcome or impact, right? That's actually a question that we often struggle with. Is what we're doing actually impactful, right? Maybe we're just a bunch of youths yapping into a blank void that nobody listens to, right? But I think what happens is like, we go back to our passion, right? Why we still do this, and also then celebrating the small wins, right? Like you mentioned, there are more teachers actually that we see coming up to us and say, can you run a workshop with our students, or can you, present about your work at a booth or at a assembly sharing. Or you see more, companies or more organizations or more youths coming to us and also saying, how can I support? I want to know about your work. And I think this is like the small little mindset shifts that we see in how there's growing interest in wanting to, number one, understand about environment, and also number two, engaging youth on it. And then working with our group. So I would say, like, yeah, you can say, I mean, that it's not very linear relationship also in that when the government makes policy changes, you're not very sure if it's because of you, right? So if it's because of your group, but you can potentially hope that you made some impact in influencing certain policymakers, ensuring that there are people who are interested in this issue and this is the way that they think. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty good. I will say that in my very honest opinion, I have seen change in like the 5-6 years that I've been doing this. It's very slow, and a lot of times you don't know if or when the change will come. Sometimes there are issues that I raised like 3-4 years ago, and then like, I only see the result now. And the thing about the government is that the whole thought process occurs in a black box. They'll consult you and they'll ask for your opinion, but then like you don't know how they're gonna take the idea. They're definitely gonna water it down, because they basically have to juggle a bunch of different agendas. So they need to like find a middle ground between everyone's. So like eventually when the final result comes out, I'll be like, oh, that's what they did, huh? Okay. So this is a process that you see very often with environmental impact assessments. I will say one thing though: the single best thing to drive a policy change is a scandal. Because the government is a very well calibrated, very carefully calibrated machine. So their crisis response is not very good. So when something happens that they're not prepared for, that's when, and assuming the youth group is not the cause of the crisis, when the youth groups come in and say like, oh, we've actually been looking at this issue for a while and this is what we think. Our oil-spill response last year, which we actually did together with SYCA and Lepak Energy, is a very good example. The oil-spill response was a mess last year. We put out an open letter saying like, this is our autopsy of everything that happened. Eventually, we got like we managed to get an in-person session with NYC, with MPA, sat down, talked to them, and they actually revised their protocol. And this happened in a span of just a few months. Recently, someone got shot in the nature reserve for cycling, right? Suddenly now everyone cares about people entering the nature reserve illegally. We know that this has been happening for years, but because someone got shot, thankfully, I don't say, but not fatally shot, but because someone got shot, now people are like a bit more concerned, like, oh, something happened. No, this is something that we have to address. So usually when an incident happens, then people are just like, the nature group is alright. Okay, what do we do? So I will say that that's a very, very efficient way to get things done. Of course, you can't engineer an incident like that. You just have to not hope for an incident to happen, but when an incident happens, you be prepared to jump immediately.
Hopefully there's somebody also.
That one got a lot of incidents already lah. So I'm not sure if anything will happen soon. But I will say that Facebook comments are, if you really got nothing better to do, I was telling them as well, you really want to just go to Facebook comments. That gives you a good indication of what people think about issues. I think the Facebook comments have changed over the years. In response to wildlife, a lot of them have gone from being like, snake, to like, oh, the snake is just in the longkang, minding its own business. Can you just leave it alone or not? So yeah, I think that's a lot more positive. Yeah, so just being mindful of time, I think we are out of it. 5 more minutes. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. You said you had 2 questions?
But then you go first. But I just want to ask about EIAs. I think in Singapore's context, especially actually in parks, and I attended a couple of their sharings. It's also more like regeneration of the, let's say, the biodiversity that is missing, the otters and the hornbill. I mean, in fact, they are doing the repercussions of how successful they are now. I think in terms of the EIA, something that is not mandatory in Singapore as of now, but one of the discussions that have happened in the last few years is also like, number one, like, when do we need an EIA and how will we forward? I think the Cross Island Line was a perfect example. The government says that, okay, nothing near national parks, but then when it's in their benefit, then it only can cross under MacRitchie. And also in terms of I guess my question is, maybe 15 years ago, the EIA thing was raised, we might not have done online, but we are all reaping the benefits of Tarham to this case. It's touched so many nature resources. So I guess my question is for you all from a personal level, how do you actually find the balance between environment and say convenience and economical kind of value? Because it's something that's quite tricky now, especially with how the EIA conversation and everything.
Great. I think I'm probably the only person here who can answer that question. So yeah, I think it's a bit difficult as a youth, especially. I'm not, unfortunately, but a lot of my friends at my age are getting BTOs. So the housing crisis is a very personal issue to a lot of youths. A lot of them are in the BTO queues. So imagine like you're sitting in an EA consult, fighting against a BTO project, or advocating for less BTOs when you yourself are waiting for a BTO. Like the crisis is a lot more apparent to us. For some housing projects like Dover, I remember there were a lot of comments back in the day where people were saying like, I'm gonna boycott this like development. And I look at the profile picture, it's like a balding man. I'm just like, I'm pretty sure you have a home. So like you boycott the BTO project also, it's not gonna affect a deep thing, right? So yeah, it's those kind of like, yeah, these sentiments are very present. But how do we sort of like find that middle ground? I would think that the younger folks are a bit more open to negotiation. We are a bit more like, okay, yeah, can we like have some sort of middle ground? Whereas I tend to observe the older folks in each community who I guess they have more principle based beliefs that it's like, oh, all forests are equally important. Whereas for us, we are just like, okay, we need to put our battles, we need to like really like focus on like where are the core nature areas to protect and which areas are perhaps a bit more okay for us to like make negotiations or compromise. Yeah, I think Jayden, you have some experience working with EIA consultants.
So an example of this is recently someone told me, hey, SYVB, can you all help? They emailed us lah. They asked us, there's this old golf course next to Singapore Polytechnic, and it's slated for development. And there's no EIA because it's a golf course. Right? Singaporeans have been fighting for like so many years trying to rig down all these golf courses. So, the government is happy to build on it. And this person messaged us and said, hey, can you fight to leave this golf course as is? Because there are some rare migratory birds that pass through, which is true. About 2 years ago, we had an Armour Stone chat, which is just probably, we have like less than 10 passing through a year, right? Passing through Singapore every year, maybe even less than 5. And, the fact they showed up there means that that place is a good wetland site, so you should clean up the place and, make it prim and proper. I think, like, you can imagine one golf course, how many BTOs you can fit on it, right? How many youths can buy those houses so that we don't have to mow down a bigger forest like Clementi Forest, stuff like that. So I think, yeah, that's the prime example of choosing your battles. Would choose golf course or Clementi Forest? I think the answer is pretty obvious, right? Because one has to go to feed the development needs of us humans, right? And this is I think it also goes even further because for the Cross Island Line, LTA's reason for keeping that alignment that goes under Suntrack is because every year there will be how many millions of dollars lost, right, because of that 20-minute detour. And yeah, so it's really like choosing your when is the threshold that you let go. And I think the even bigger problem is I don't think anyone really knows exactly where you need to stand so that you are sustainable, because we've only been doing this for like a decade, 2 decades, right? Maybe even less than that. But to be sustainable means that you can do this indefinitely. So what amount of green spaces or blue spaces do you need to conserve to remain sustainable? But also, what amount of housing do you need to provide to remain sustainable as a human society? So I think that's the biggest issue. Unless you have a time machine, a time travel, right? You really can't find out now, exactly where you need to stand. how much forest can cover Singapore so that we can be self-sustaining for forever. Yeah, nobody knows, I think. Researchers can debate, youths can debate, experts can debate, but that's all we can do, right? We can debate. We can't stand here and say, oh no, we should have exactly 12% of Singapore's area as green spaces. Nobody really knows the exact number. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Do you have time for one more question? Or just one more? No. Oh, all right, sure. Okay, I guess that's a relatively good note to end on. Do we have any further comments from our other panelists? Any closing?
I guess it can close.
Yeah, my job. So yeah, I think even though I've been in this space for quite long, I learned quite a bit about like the other sort of dimensions of different issues, from the capacity building side for youths to even like on plastic and heat issues. So, and even a little bit about your perspectives on outreach. Very interesting. You talk to people often. So yeah, thank you so much for all of your wonderful insights. I know the audience also learned quite a bit here. I see a lot of very young faces and young at heart faces as well. So I hope that they are also very inspired by your sharing, and will take these to heart, either like when interacting with other youths or when like working on their own projects in the future. So with that, thank you so much for joining us this evening.